The Giants made a trade today acquiring Willie Calhoun from the Texas Rangers in exchange for Steven Duggar. And they also had a couple of really difficult losses to end this road trip, and they wrapped up their series in Atlanta. So we'll put it all into context next.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily San Francisco Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Giants, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. My name is Ben Kaspick, and on this show we provide daily episodes Monday through Friday talking about the San Francisco Giants in a way that's data-driven and rational, but also simple, passionate, and accessible to all. I'm a former contributor for the baseball statistics and analysis websites Beyond the Box Score and Rotographs. I've been podcasting about the Giants since 2015, and I'm a lifelong fan. Thank you for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get podcasts. And coming up on today's show, we've got two games to talk about, and we've also got a trade to talk about. So I promise we will discuss the last two games for the Giants, which they lost both by one run. They lost all three games in this series by one run, and their loss in Pittsburgh was by one run. And so we're going to put that into context. It was definitely brutal and disappointing, especially a couple games ago. But overall, there are some reasons for optimism. But let's start with the trade. I think that given we're talking about a couple losses here, I think the trade is more interesting to start with. And the move is that they send Steven Duggar to the Texas Rangers in exchange for Willie Calhoun. There's a lot of context to provide here. The number one thing to kind of keep in mind about this is that Steven Duggar was on a rehab assignment in AAA. And there's only so much time you can be on a rehab assignment. It's like an official assignment. So he was on the 60-day injured list after he injured his oblique. And when you put a guy on the 60-day IL as opposed to the 10-day IL, it opens up a 40-man spot for you. You don't have to like DFA someone to add someone else to the 40-man. It clears a spot. Like the player who was occupying that spot is cleared. And so Duggar being on the 60-day IL meant he wasn't on the 40-man roster. But this was the last day of his rehab assignment, meaning he had to be added back to the 40-man roster or else they had to make a move like this. And they didn't want to have to re-add him to the 40-man roster, which would have meant designating someone for assignment or putting someone else on the 60-day IL. And so they made this trade for Calhoun. And Calhoun is a very interesting guy in his own right. He's a former top prospect. He was the centerpiece of the trade in which the Dodgers acquired Yu Dardish from the Texas Rangers back in 2017. And you have to keep in mind that back in 2017, Yu Dardish was like the big fish trade candidate. He was like Max Scherzer was last year. I mean, he was a big name kind of there. I think he was already experiencing some sort of decline issues perhaps, but he was the top dog out there, and the Dodgers got him, and the main piece they gave up was Willie Calhoun. So he goes to Texas. He's been there, I think he's played in parts of 5 seasons now for the Texas Rangers, and he just has not lived up to expectations. That being said, when I look at Willie Calhoun's profile, I've always thought he's a guy who should hit. He just hasn't done it. And the main kind of key point about Willie Calhoun is that it's the bat is what people get excited about when he was a prospect. He's not really a prospect anymore, although he is still just 27 years old. He grew up in the Bay Area. I believe he grew up a Giants fan. I just watched a video of him talking about his idol growing up was Barry Bonds. And so he's coming home in a sense. And what's significant here is that Calhoun was no longer on the Rangers 40-man roster. And so basically you're swapping out Duggar for Calhoun, but Duggar would have had to be added to the 40-man, and Calhoun does not. So he gets to report to the Giants can send him to AAA, but he's not on the 40-man roster. So in order to add him to the major league team, which is not a guarantee that that will ever happen, but if they did decide to do that, they would then have to add him to the 40-man. So it makes a lot of sense given the logistics around these rules around who can and cannot be on your roster and when you have to activate guys off of their rehab assignments. But for Calhoun, I mean, just to give a quick little rundown of the profile that you're getting here, you're getting a lot of contact. He is a guy who has always had consistently above average rates of contact. As a result, his strikeout rate for his career is 15.2% in the major leagues. And it was up around 20% his first couple of years, and it's been closer to 10 to 15% the last several years in Texas. So a lot of contact, doesn't strike out, makes good swing decisions, doesn't chase out of the zone, has some power. And so, like, when I see all that, I see a guy who should be able to hit, but he simply hasn't done it. And our Locked On Rangers host was giving me the rundown on Calhoun, and called him like the unluckiest player in baseball over his tenure in Texas. And that every time he kind of was getting into a groove, he had some fluke injury, like getting hit. I think he may have been hit in the face by a pitch. I could be wrong, but I heard he broke his jaw and that it was related to a hit by pitch. So I'm assuming he got hit in the face. Would want to verify that, but he also got hit in the hand when he was starting to do well. So it just never came together for Calhoun. It's a very low risk move for the Giants. I mean, they're not committing anything necessarily to Calhoun, but in Duggar, they lose a player who was pretty good for them last year. And it is interesting. Duggar is one of their best defensive outfielders, if not their best. And they just said sayonara. Like, the thing is, we're talking about how can you keep Luis Gonzalez on the roster? How do you avoid having to send Luis Gonzalez to the minor leagues? Well, Steven Duggar is still another tier even below Luis Gonzalez now on the depth chart. And so it would be seemingly impossible to fit Yastrzemski, Wade, Jock Peterson, Luis Gonzalez, and there's somebody else I'm even forgetting from that mix. It's so many like spinning plates here, but it was hard enough to figure out how to keep Luis Gonzalez on the roster with the return of Wade, but then you add Duggar to the mix, and it just basically he would take up a 40-man spot, but he wasn't in their immediate plans or even long-term plans, I would imagine. And so this move kind of makes sense for both sides, and I like it from the Giants' perspective because I didn't see Duggar as being a guy who was necessarily going to be able to hit enough to stay in the major leagues. The Giants, they don't really seemingly want guys who are just defensive first players. If they can't contribute with the bat, that's a problem. And Duggar was really not contributing with the bat to start off the year. And in his major league career, he owns a 297 on base percentage and 81 weighted runs created plus. The numbers for Calhoun are not much better. But the thing about Calhoun is he has that pedigree, and the profile of contact, swing decisions, not striking out is more intriguing offensively. But for Calhoun, I don't think I even mentioned this yet, there is a big question about defense, and he doesn't run well and he doesn't defend well. He's a guy they've tried at different positions in the minor leagues. In the majors, he's only played the outfield and DH, but he's not a good defender. He's not a good runner. So the Giants, they have a lot of this type of player who, the Darren Ruffs of the world, the Wilmer Floreses of the world. So Calhoun, I would put him more in that Darren Ruff category because he's more of an outfielder and maybe a guy who can play some first. He is a left-handed hitter. We may or may not see him at some point, but here's the thing. Duggar just wasn't providing all that much value, and so you're not going to get like a superstar in exchange for Steven Duggar. That much should be evident. I should also mention Luis Gonzalez was placed on the injured list prior to today's game against the Braves. So when I was talking about how do you fit Lamont Wade with Luis Gonzalez, and then where does that leave Duggar? Well, Luis Gonzalez is on the IL. There you go. That's how you fit Wade on the roster, but then there's no clear path for Steven Duggar, especially once Luis Gonzalez returns. So anyway, coming up next, we'll wrap up this discussion, but I also want to talk about these two games in Atlanta that wrapped up the series. The Giants blowing a 2-run lead in the 9th inning in the third game of the series, and then just not being able to come all the way back despite a valiant effort in the finale. So we'll talk about the good and the bad out of these last two games in Atlanta in just a second. But first, whether you're ready to pop the question or you're celebrating a milestone moment, find jewelry as unique as her with the modern convenience of online shopping at BlueNile.com. If you're looking for fine jewelry but having trouble choosing, well, Blue Nile has jewelry experts on hand 24/7, available via phone or chat to help you find a memorable gift at every budget. And for me, this is huge because I really hate the inconvenience of going to a store and having to do these high pressure kind of purchases in an intimidating way. I feel like the convenience of online shopping is huge for fine jewelry, and you can get these experts anytime, like I said. So make your moment sparkle with jewelry from BlueNile.com, and Locked On Giants listeners get $50 off purchases of $500 or more. This podcast exclusive includes engagement. Use code LOCKEDON, that's code LOCKEDON. Plus, every order is insured, ships free, and arrives in discreet packaging that won't give away what's inside. So shop stress-free and find your forever piece. Go to BlueNile.com today. All right, as promised, there's a lot to talk about from these last two games. It's like, on the one hand, it's disappointing. You lose 3 out of 4. You have a losing road trip. You have a gut-wrenching loss in the third game of the series. But on the other hand, I have a hard time not being somewhat optimistic about what I saw in the fight from these Giants, and really how they were one inning away, one hit, one clutch inning away from at least a split, or maybe even better than that. They were that close. Our live NBA draft show is not enough for Locked On, or one live NBA draft show is not enough. The entire NBA channel is going live on NBA draft night. So if you have a favorite NBA team, which I know you do, make sure you subscribe now to their Locked On YouTube channel so you can be notified when they go live on NBA draft night. So anyway, there's a lot to say about the last couple of games. Ultimately, let's just take a big picture look at this series for the San Francisco Giants. So they end up losing 3 out of 4 to the Atlanta Braves on the road, right? So it's a good team, a hot team, a team that won the World Series last year. The Braves are at home, and the ball kind of bounced their way a lot. And the final score in this series ended up being 23-22. So if ever there was a score that kind of indicated that this series probably should have been split, it's the fact that the run differential in the series was -1 for the Giants. And they, like I said, on Thursday, they fell behind early. Alex Wood was not good. And so they were in a big hole early. I think it was 6-1 or even 6-0. And they clawed their way back and ended up losing by 1 run. Jock Peterson just continued his monster season, hit a home run off Kenley Jansen in the 9th to make it a 1-run game, but they just came up short. They had so many base runners. They hit into a bunch of double plays. We'll get into that later, but there were many opportunities where if they just had one more big hit, it's not that they didn't get a lot of big hits today, because they did, but they were just missing one more hit. So you're literally talking about one plate appearance can completely change the game, and therefore the narrative about this entire series and road trip. And that's where, if you're like literally one pitch away from an entirely different narrative, I need to take a step back and say, it's not right to go down the negative narrative route, because if the margin is that thin between a good outcome and a bad outcome, you're kind of right there, and it could have gone either way. And for the Giants, I mean, it's not just this game and the comeback effort on Thursday. What about Wednesday night? The Giants behind Carlos Rodon, who was as good as he's ever been. Just a gutsy effort by Rodon, went 7 innings. Pitch count was kind of low when they took him out. It was like 91 or something, but it was extremely hot. He did look like he was emptying the tank in that 7th inning. His velocity was as high as it had been all game, and I think that was more of a matter of him emptying the tank than he was just feeling better than he had at any point in the game. And after the game, Kapler and Rodon seemed to be on the same page about that. So they go to Brebbia, who gets a scoreless 8th, and for me, there was a little bit of a question, because they go to Camilo Doval, or excuse me, they don't go to Camilo Doval, they go to Jake McGee. Camilo Doval was unavailable. He's thrown a lot. I think he had thrown 4 out of 5 days, including 3 in a row. So 100% they weren't going to use Doval, and I completely get that. But could you have gone with Brebbia for a second inning, just as a, just by way of example? Because Brebbia has done that a lot, and there were righties coming up, and the first batter against McGee was Dansby Swanson, who is he just torched them in the series, and I probably would have liked a Brebbia versus Swanson matchup more than McGee. And McGee just gave up a bunch of hard contact. Here's the thing, though, about McGee. Ever since he came off the injured list, he hadn't allowed a run. So he was on a stretch of throwing the ball extremely well. It wasn't just that he hadn't allowed a run. He just was pitching well, and the fastball velocity had ticked up. It was more upper 90s than low to mid that we saw early in the season. And McGee was a huge part of the bullpen for the Giants last year when they won 107 games. So I'm not ready to just say McGee is garbage, DFA him, and how could you throw him in that situation? It's not like he's a guy who can only face left-handed pitching. He was their closer for the first part of the year last year, and the Giants had a historic season. But at the same time, I didn't love the matchup as it was beginning. But look, I mean, they're managing a bullpen is tough, and if it works, you look good, and if it doesn't, you look bad. It's just the way it goes. But I wasn't completely sold that McGee in that situation was the right matchup. Maybe Brebbia wasn't feeling great. It didn't feel like he could give you two, and then you have limited options, but maybe Harleen Garcia is a better possibility. But the point is, the Giants had a 2-run lead in the 9th inning. So they're one shutdown inning away from taking a 2-1 lead in the series, which would have guaranteed them at least a split in this 4-game series in Atlanta, with a chance to get greedy and take 3 out of 4 today. And it would have also guaranteed them at least a 4-3 road trip, if not 5-2. And so completely changes the narrative, what happens in that 9th inning. And so again, when the margins are razor thin like that, and when you're 1 inning away of just getting 3 outs from having a very positive outlook on the team versus you blow the game, it's like obviously emotional. I was frustrated. I know Giants fans anywhere who were watching that game, it was very frustrating, and you wasted a great Rodon start. But at the same time, you can't, for me, I do not think I can dramatically change how I view the team based on 1 inning. It's just not rational at all. And I get that emotions and sports fandom is not rational most of the time, or a lot of the time at least. But that's just like my job here is to talk about the Giants, and I refuse to get like super negative about the team in general just based on 1 inning. So of course it's not just 1 inning. All season long it's been kind of a grind for the Giants. But even though they lose that heartbreaker, which would have put them 10 games over 500, by the way, they would have been 39-29 with a chance to go 40-29 or at worst 39-30. Even though they lose that heartbreaker and then lose the next game in a similar type of way, in that they were just like that close, their record is what, 38-31? So it's really not a bad record. And Gabe Kapler, I thought, said it pretty well after the game, that he thinks they're in a fine position. They're not in a great position. They'd like to be in a better position, but they're fine. And that's kind of how I view it too, especially when you look at what's coming up on the schedule. The Braves in Atlanta for 4 is tough. And like I said, the run differential was right there. Really, if you redo this series, you might split, I think, based on kind of what we saw overall. And now you come home for a 3-team homestand. It's not 9 games. It's only 8 games because one of the series is only 2 games. But there are 3 teams that are currently below 500, including the Reds coming in next. One of the worst teams in the league, if not the worst. I'll have to check on that in a minute. And also the Tigers, who have really, really struggled mostly this season, although they have some intriguing young talent. And then the White Sox and their whole charade with Tony La Russa coming into town as well. So we'll get you set for that in just a minute. But also I do a little bit want to talk about how the home plate umpire unfortunately played a role in the loss in the 3rd game of the series for the Giants. He had a pretty good game overall in terms of accuracy and consistency, but he made some big calls, and they all were huge against the Giants. So we'll talk about that as well in just a minute. But first, our next partner has a product that I use literally every day. I started taking AG1 because I wanted to see what all the hype was about. So what is this stuff? With 1 delicious scoop of AG1, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, your immune system, your energy, recovery, focus, and aging, all of the things. It's lifestyle friendly, whether you eat keto, paleo, vegan, dairy-free, or gluten-free, and very importantly to me, contains less than 1 gram of sugar. Right now, it's time to reclaim your health and arm your immune system with convenient daily nutrition. Just 1 scoop in a cup of water every day. That's it. No need for a million different pills and supplements to look out for your health. And to make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1-year supply of immune-supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/MLB Network. Again, that's athleticgreens.com/MLB Network to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. All right, as promised, I'm going to complain about the umpiring again. This was a particularly harmful game. If you look at the great Twitter account, Umpire Scorecards, I'm not sure. This is not the official kind of review of the umpires that they're actually judged based on. They get more leeway. So on our screens, we see the box, right? We see the strike zone. And if it's just off the plate, we're like, wow, you messed up if you called it a strike and it's off the box. Well, in reality, when they're judged, they get a little wiggle room. And so it's only if it's really off the plate do they get hurt, dinged with a missed call. And so it's crazy, though, when you look at the umpire scorecard for yesterday's game, Wednesday's game, the umpire in general, and Dave Fleming was talking about this before the game, known as one of the best umpires in the game, more rule book umpire, calls the box, basically. And he did do that for the most part, but just he had a handful of missed calls, and they just all came at really unfortunate times for the Giants. And in fact, even I have to say, on that umpire scorecard that you can see on Twitter, it's not even showing the one that was perhaps the biggest one of all. It was the second pitch in a row that Tyler Rogers had thrown for a strike to, I think it was Orlando Arcia, who ended up striking out finally a third time, basically, on the next pitch. But on the pitch, the runner who was on first stole second base. And so that was the winning run in the bottom of the ninth inning, who got to move to second base when if either pitch prior to the actual strike three had been called strike three and both of them were in the zone, then the runner doesn't move to second base. It's not like theoretical or anything. It's just matter of fact. If either of those pitches were called a strike, the runner is on first, not second, when Adam Duvall comes up. Maybe he steals second anyway in the middle of Duvall's at bat. Maybe Duvall ends up hitting an extra base hit and he scores anyway. Maybe Duvall gets a single just like he did, and the next guy, because the inning would have continued, and maybe the next guy gets it done. But the simple fact is, if either of those pitches had been called strikes, and they were strikes, then the runner would have started on first base for Duvall's at bat, and instead the runner started on second, and Duvall lined a single into center, and it ended the game. And also when the Giants were hitting, at least to end the bottom or the top of the ninth, Austin Wynns was at the plate in a full count with two guys on, and he took ball 4, and it was called strike 3. It wasn't even close to the strike zone, and that happened 2 times to the Giants late in the game. So it's crazy because the umpire scorecard, it talks about the change in expected runs, basically. It's not actual runs, it's expected runs. And he was plus like 1.5 runs in favor of the Braves in a 1-run game. And it wasn't even counting what to me was one of the most impactful calls of all, the second pitch that should have been strike 3 with Tyler Rogers pitching. And I must say, the first one, Austin Wynns didn't frame it well. It was like he kind of reached for it and he just didn't try to present it as a strike. The second one he did. It was at the top of the zone, but very much in the zone. It was one of those rising sliders. So I think it actually hit the zone on the way up. I immediately know some people are saying it doesn't actually rise. The physicists, as Mike Krukow would say, will tell you it can't possibly rise. It very much can rise if you're releasing it from the ground, right? That doesn't make any sense at all. If I think about, you could throw a baseball from Tyler Rogers' angle straight up in the air, right? It can rise, okay? So it was rising. His slider does have vertical upwards movement, and I thought it caught the zone kind of on the way up. It was a strike, and it would have potentially changed the game. And so I can't stand this. Whether it goes for the Giants or against them, obviously I'm a little more salty about it if it goes against them, but my philosophy has always been, for many years now, just get them right, man. Or just be able to at least challenge really quickly like they do in tennis. Nothing with the headsets or anything like that. Just challenge, show it on the scoreboard, change the call, boom, bang, bang, bing, bang, boom, done. Strike 3, runners on first. And so anyway, that's what I have to say there. So turning the page, the Giants come home now. They fought in this series, like I said, even though it was ultimately disappointing. The series was disappointing. They fought and they were right there, and now they come home for what is on paper a soft portion of the schedule. And so you have some opportunities now to make up some ground. You play the Cincinnati Reds, who have been one of the worst teams in baseball this season. And then you play the Detroit Tigers, and you also play the Chicago White Sox. And then they finally play the Arizona Diamondbacks after that. The Reds, by the way, are the worst team in the league. They have a .333 winning percentage, which is the worst in the National League. And they've lost 7 straight, and they just played in Cincinnati. So they have a long flight themselves coming to San Francisco. And the Tigers are 26-43. Their run differential is -100. The Reds are -79. So actually a worse run differential even than the Reds. And then the White Sox have been kind of a mess. They're just one game below 500, but their run differential suggests more like a team that should be 10 games under 500. So they're underperforming, talented team, but underperforming under Tony La Russa this year. So that's all the time we have for today. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to do a mailbag. So look out on Twitter for the prompt if you want to ask more about Willie Calhoun or the Steven Duggar trade or anything at all. Look out on Twitter Thursday night, and we will have that prompt up there, and we'll get to those questions tomorrow. Thanks again for making Locked On Giants your first listen every day. The first picks of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made. Search now for Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and get over 50 insiders, the Odyssey sports experts, the draft experts of Locked On NBA Big Board as well. The 5-episode Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. Make Ultimate NBA Mock Draft your second listen today. Once again, I'm Ben Kaspick. Thanks. Check me out on Twitter. At Ben Kaspick, Kaspick. If you like this show, please smash that thumbs up button, that 5-star button. Really appreciate it. So thanks in advance. And thank you to everyone who's done so already. Can't wait to be with you again tomorrow. Thanks again for listening. Stay locked on Giants.